Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to the season 2 premiere of In the Clouds. I am joined by the one and only Kirsten, Newcomer, security extraordinaire to the stars is what I'm going to call you, Kirsten. The welcome to the new season of In the Clouds. As you can see, we've kind of spruced up the place thanks to our marketing communications team and our new media initiatives team. Thank you very much for all the graphics and work that we've put into this. And with that, let's get started with the show. Today we're talking about DevSecOps or shifting left or improving security posture. However you want to phrase it in your organization is kind of the way we're going to talk about it. And this is a subject close to my heart, but it's much closer to Kirsten's heart. So Kirsten, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us how you got involved with DevSecOps?
Sure. So Kirsten Newcomer, Director of Security Strategy for the Cloud Platforms BU here at Red Hat. It's been kind of a winding trajectory for DevSecOps. I actually have been in the software field for longer than I care to admit. I have been a system admin, a quality engineer, I've managed a release engineering team, done program management, product management, and kind of that combination, and all of that sort of leading into a focus on security. And that combination means that I spent time at Rational Software working on developer tools.
Oh, wow.
Now we're here at Red Hat, really focused more on infrastructure, but also platforms that support the developer. Mm-hmm. And I worked at Black Duck Software for a while, which is all about securing the application bits and the pre-deployment. And so DevOps and DevSecOps has been something I've been interested in and watching for a time. And so we'll talk about why DevOps versus DevSecOps phrasing maybe a little bit later as we go along.
Sure, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So folks out there in TV land, however you want to refer to whatever the streaming thing is you're watching right now, please feel free to ask questions and contribute to the discussion. We have no problem answering any questions you may have related to security or shifting left or culture change in that regard. First question, kind of a, break the ice question. Is cheesecake a cake or a pie?
I just love that question. So my mother's cheesecake has always been a pie. It is cooked in a pie. It has a layer of sour cream cooked on top of it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's about an inch, 2 inches high at the most. Now, if it's 4 inches high or more, that's a cake. So sorry, I gave you a waffle answer.
No, that's not a waffle answer. Like that actually helps us get to the root of the question, right? Like if it's 4 inches or higher, it is now a cake, right? Like this is discussions that we don't normally have, right? So it's good to know that we can safely land on if it's 4 inches or higher, it's a cake. Got it. All right. Actually, cheesecake is literally the only cake I will eat. It's my favorite thing. And
it's good stuff.
It's great stuff. So on a more serious note, one thing I've kind of learned along the way here at Red Hat is that it's rare that coming to work at Red Hat is the first time you've worked with a Red Hat product or technology or even project. How did you get first introduced to Red Hat itself?
Honestly, it really started with my introduction to open source, which goes back to my time at Rational, in fact. Rational Software and Developer Tools. Rational used to consider itself the Switzerland between IBM and Microsoft when it came to developer tools.
Interesting.
And one of the things that kind of our partnership with IBM led to was an engagement with the Eclipse Foundation and Eclipse IDEs, and starting to deliver developer tools built with and for Eclipse. And that was my first exposure to open source, and it was fascinating to see how it changed the market, right? It really shifted from proprietary IDEs to open source. And then from there, it kind of moved into, Linux as the open source platform, And actually, Rational had been running on Linux for a long time.
Right.
And then just sort of at Black Duck Software, one of the things that I really enjoyed, Black Duck, which is now part of Synopsys, had a solution for discovering and identifying open source licenses in software packages, as well as then eventually they added on open source vulnerabilities. And I just loved the combination of the technical challenge of how do you identify the software combined with all the complexity of open source licenses, which are just so funky, including like there's the beer license, which anybody who uses this software,
right.
must contribute a 6-pack of beer somewhere, somehow to the author.
So good.
So there's just, I just love that stuff. And then also, honestly, at when I was at Black Duck, Tim Yaton was our CEO for a while. And Tim now runs, he'd been at Red Hat previously. He came back to Red Hat. And so just had a great exposure to kind of, both the community open source, and then what does it mean to kind of actually productize open source and make it ready for enterprise use. So
interesting. Awesome. But when did you join Red Hat? I guess
5 years ago.
5 years ago.
Okay. 5 years ago.
So it's funny that you mentioned you worked at Black Duck, because Black Duck used to give away, when we were traveling and going to like trade shows and such,
yes,
a literal black,
yes, little rubber ducks,
toy duck,
yep,
rubber ducky, right? And
yep,
so my son's favorite shower bath toy is the Black Duck,
yep,
rubber ducky right now.
Yeah.
So
I have a whole bunch of them in my cube in Westford, where I can't go right now.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Good fun. Yeah. The whole office thing. Yeah. So speaking of, offices and such, security has classically been siloed, right? Like I remember our security person at one company, like literally was in an office in the back of the data center where no one ever walked or went unless it was to go to the bathroom. So yeah, like that's how I've seen, security kind of classically been treated. It's like divorced from the software development process, and it's very much like the last checkbox, and maybe it's a good check, or maybe it's a go back and do everything again check. So why are we changing things now is the big question I have.
Yeah, a couple of things around that. And I think you're right? So the security professionals have typically been siloed from the development teams in particular. They may be more connected to operations, but even there, kind of it's been more about defining policies that then the ops team has to implement as procedures and make sure that they meet. And when DevOps first became a thing, and in many ways, DevOps is a follow-on to agile development methodology, right? Kind of trying to, again, apply some of those same principles, not just to the development cycle, but getting that code released early and often also, right? DevOps is about that. Security was always intended to be part of that melding between development and production, but it did get overlooked in many cases when teams started doing DevOps. And even today, in some cases, DevOps is seen as something that belongs more to the application team, even though it's intended to include ops. And so I tend to talk about DevSecOps because I want to explicitly call out that teams need to integrate security thinking into their DevOps lifecycle. So just as the app dev teams need to talk to ops to figure out in that DevOps process, how do they ensure they're meeting the resiliency requirements that ops has, various configuration, regulatory requirements. They also need to be sure that they're meeting the security requirements. Some of those security requirements are regulatory. Some of them are internally driven and are about policy. And so in addition to shifting security left, right, you mentioned how security often comes at the end. There's nothing worse for a development team than getting that security analysis and check at the point at which they're ready to deploy their code and learning that they have to go back and start over. I mean,
And
nobody wants that.
yeah, and some of those cycles, right? Like your deployment cycle could be a quarter. So code you wrote 3 months ago
Yeah.
could be reevaluated, and you have no idea why you wrote it that way.
Right. And
that's no good for anybody.
right. Or there's a vulnerabilities with scan was run, and you discover one of your packages has that scan, and now you have to upgrade that package. It has that vulnerability. You have to upgrade that package to the newer version, but that package has dependencies on other packages.
Right.
And so you're not necessarily just updating one package in your application. You may wind up updating 5 of them. And so you wind up having to, check your code, retest, et cetera. And so it's really like one of the simple, useful things folks can do is do vulnerability analysis scanning in their CI, right?
Yes.
During their build process. Also, even better, right, is if you use something like the IDE plugins that Red Hat provides, where you can do dependency analysis and security and get security data in your IDE real time, right? So that even before you check in, you can decide, you can learn whether there's something that maybe needs to be fixed. But at minimum, doing it during that build process, right? We always used to talk about the stats, right? How much time does it take to fix a bug that's found in production versus one that's found in test? And this is the same kind of thing, right? Let's find and fix security issues as far left in the process as we can.
Right. So like understanding the importance of having a software pipeline is huge, right? Like it's not just handing code off to the next team. It's you want some automation between that handoff, right?
Absolutely, especially when it comes to cloud native, but not just for cloud native. But when we think about containers and Kubernetes, right? Best practice is you never patch a running container. And why is that? Because a container orchestration solution is designed so that if a running instance of your application goes down, a new instance will automatically be deployed from the container image, from the pod. So if you've patched a running instance and not rebuilt your image, you lose that fix as soon as the redeploy happens.
Right.
So you need your pipeline, that DevOps, that DevSecOps pipeline, to have as much automation as possible so that you can respond quickly when new issues are found at whatever layer of your application they're in. Are they in the base image? Are they in your runtime? Are they in the custom code that you're writing, the code that's key for your app? You need automation for building, and ideally, and again, for security testing, but also ideally for QE testing, for user experience testing. That's a challenge for some organizations, right? How much test automation they can get in place. That can be easier for greenfield apps than it is for legacy apps.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to put a legacy process into the pipeline, but it is more than worth it.
Absolutely.
You can then do what brings us to our first question for the audience is, in your opinion, like what is the right order of static analysis, dynamic analysis, open source? There's all these different kinds of scanning tools that are out there now that cover like all these different parts of the pipeline. Is there a right order? I mean, is there a preferred order of the way you do your, DevSecOps, or is it really up to the team?
It's a really interesting question. So some kinds of scans make more sense in different places, right? So that dependency analysis, if you can find a tool that will give you dependency info in your IDE, that's a big win.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Yeah, no kidding.
That's big value. Same for vulnerability analysis, but most vulnerability scanners, which sometimes are also software config analysis scanners, right? They figure out what packages, what code is in the blob that you're analyzing, and they tell you what those packages are, and then they map to known vulnerabilities. Those are best run either in your artifact repo, your container repository, right? As soon as you're down, especially if you're using external content, as soon as you pull it down, scan it.
Yeah.
That includes content from Red Hat. We'll tell you if we know about vulnerabilities, but you should do the belt and suspenders, scan it anyway.
Yeah.
right?
Like trust but verify, right?
Exactly, exactly. So, and then those scanners are typically good in the build process, right? So if you can do dependency analysis solutions like Sneak in the IDE, that's a great starting point. If you, and then build vulnerability analysis, any type of static analysis scanners have pros and cons, right? There are things like Coverity, other solutions that kind of analyze your code for the quality. SonarQube, what's the quality? Are there things like cross-site scripting risks in your code? You want to do those as early as possible too. And most of those scanners require some tuning. So yeah, because you wind up with false positives, et cetera. So those ideally would be kind of in that CI process as well. And then you want for runtime, for dynamic analysis, that's in your test environment, right? You're testing your application as it runs. So you also, in any DevOps pipeline, DevSecOps pipeline, you want to be sure that you've got a test environment that is what exact, as close as possible to your production environment. And that, if you're going to do dynamic analysis, you do that in that test environment, along with any automated user acceptance tests, things like that. And again, one of the values of containers in Kubernetes, right, is that you can have an OpenShift cluster that looks just like your production cluster. Your development team, your user acceptance team, they can have the same environment, the same constraints. You've got all your system dependencies packaged with your container image. And so this simplifies the debug process if something slips through in your testing and hits in production, but you also, you've got that same deployed environment. And then finally, you really want to add, like oftentimes, and I feel like in our conversation, I've been guilty of this. When we talk shift left, we talk DevSecOps, we think about it as DevSec. That is, what are the security tools that are useful to the developer? And I think that's partly because that's the area that's been neglected. But DevSecOps means also SecOps, right? So what are the security tools that are useful in operations for container and Kubernetes, right? So you want runtime behavioral analysis. You want things like pod security policies or security context constraints, admission control policies that help you control what privileges a container is given when it's launched. And also you want processes and gates in place that ensure you're only pulling approved images onto your production cluster. So it really is the full life cycle that you want to be thinking about.
Right, which, kind of takes us down to, how do you bridge that DevSec and that SecOps mentality together and having them work in, perfect harmony.
In tandem. And I think, that's a place that is where things are still, where the community, the software community is still working, I think. But it's also one of the reasons I'm really excited by Red Hat's recent acquisition of StackRox. Because they have the ability to leverage data collected during the build process, right? During that, they do both vulnerability analysis, but app config analysis, which is also important, right? Is the metadata, for your container and your pod, are they asking for privs? Do they have embedded secrets? That data can be, that content can be analyzed, and the data collected during the build process, and then it can be used to by an admission controller that's deployed on the cluster, and where you get to say, okay, any pods that have these characteristics may not be deployed to my cluster. So that's one of the ways that we really want tooling that leverages the data collected early that wasn't, if it wasn't fixed, let's make sure that informs our policy for deployment and kind of have that full circle.
Yes, exactly. So, we know DevSecOps is important. We know that we want to bridge the divide. How do we make that divide bridged in the kind of the cloud native and Kubernetes environments, right? Because it's very fast moving, right? Like if you look at some of the reports from the last couple of years, right? Like the average lifetime of a container is measured in seconds, that kind of thing, right? Like it's almost like containers are reaching serverless kind of like, paradigms. How do we do that? Like, so what is the good practice there for making that happen efficiently?
Right. And I think I have to answer both on the tooling and the people side. But also, certainly there have been some interesting reports about, that have been published about what's the length of time that containers run. I mean, Sysdig did a really interesting analysis, and I think that their average time for the majority of containers in their analysis was 5 minutes.
Wow.
So at least it wasn't 5 seconds.
Right.
I look at that though, and I wonder how many of those are init containers, or, how much do init containers and sidecars affect that average time span? And I don't think we know yet. At least I don't know. I'd love to have a conversation with that team and learn more about the data behind, that they collected. That said, right, we should be assuming that a container can go down and be replaced at any point, right? So one of the things that's really important to think about when it comes to cloud native workloads is to assume that they are largely ephemeral. And that means, right, that when you think about the traditional methods of securing your environment, you need to think about having both your platform and your applications, your workloads, be close to being born secure as possible. And you need to have enough automation in place that when problems crop up, because they will, you are able to respond quickly. And that automation needs to be in place both for the application, so the CI/CD pipeline for your app, but also in place for your platform, right? How are you managing deployment of your kube cluster? And are you prepared to redeploy at any moment should crypto miners be discovered on your platform, for example, right? So you really want to take that DevOps approach that is understood to be useful for apps. You want to do that for your platform too. So you want to think about it in a GitOps-like way, right? Yes. Everything should be infrastructure as code. It should be monitored. It should be assessed and evaluated. And then once it's approved and signed off on, I should be able to deploy as, anytime I want. And so sort of that's the tooling side, right? And your tooling can be, there are a range of tools that can help you there. There's for the apps, there's things like Jenkins and Tekton, the new, kind of more cloud native pipeline. For your operations, Ansible, Terraform, all sorts of different things. And Argo CD actually is a really interesting new player that kind of spans both of those. For a kube environment. And so leveraging Argo CD is a great way to go too, but store your infrastructure, treat it, your code, your configs, treat it as if it is source code, right? Version it, manage it, automate all of that. And then on the people side, back to your silo point, we collectively, including kind of the, there's the bottoms up and the top down thing, and people behave in the way they're motivated, right? So how do you help that security team that has been siloed to become partners in the process of building your DevOps pipeline for both apps and infrastructure? And one of my favorite customer examples here is a team in the federal sector who their chief of cybersecurity decided that his team of security architects needed to learn the development process and something about the tools that the developers use.
Right.
And that if he couldn't, and that until they learned that, they couldn't be effective advocates for helping get the process into a place that worked for everybody. they really needed to shift their thinking, and that takes incentives, right? For a culture to make that kind of, for an organization to make that kind of cultural change, you have to have somebody who's willing to support that and help the team be rewarded for making those kinds of shifts.
Yeah, questions just came in, like what
Sure.
tools would you recommend, that kind of thing. And I'm just going to drop a link just for, full posterity to the CNCF landscape, that specific security compliance category. But what do you think, are good tools to run against like prod, for example?
Okay. So I'm going to hit this from so one of the things we do at Red Hat is we work closely with our partners to ensure that the solutions are certified to run against OpenShift.
Right.
And that includes the ecosystem of security ISV partners, right?
Yeah,
and so when we think about it, there's a lot of different categories to look at, and so one thing to consider is value for your buck, right? Can you get a solution, a tool that helps you both with the pipeline and at runtime? And there are a number of our partners who do that, certified partners. In addition to StackRox, which is being rebranded as Red Hat Advanced Cluster Security. We also have partners like Sysdig, Palo Alto, Prisma Cloud Solution, Aqua Security. Pretty much all of those partners have solutions that, at a minimum, you can use vulnerability scanning in the pipeline as well as in a running cluster, and many of them have image assurance capabilities, just like StackRox does. And then you really want to be looking for, I'm going to share for a minute, you want to be looking for runtime analysis capabilities, right? Behavioral runtime analysis is a great win. OpenShift out of the box uses security context constraints. Right. So we have this built-in protection that prevents privileged containers from being deployed to worker nodes by default. But runtime behavioral analysis is a great addition for the production environment. Yeah. And then, are there solutions that help you do more with network controls, right? So Kubernetes has network policies. You have to figure out how to configure your environment appropriately for that. There are solutions that can auto-suggest network policies to you, for you. And that's another way you can also bridge the dev and the production environment, right? If you're running in a test cluster, and you try out some of those suggested policies, that gives you an idea of what do you want to actually deploy with. And then deep audit and monitoring is key, right? So out of the box, OpenShift includes, auditing is on at the host level, API server auditing is on for Kube, but many of these solutions also add deeper data collection and correlation. And so you can kind of get an idea here of the partners that we work with, the partners that, and again, the ones I'm going to know about are the ones that are certified to work with OpenShift, but most of them work with other Kube distros as well. So.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we love the tools that work with Kubernetes.
Absolutely.
So, I see StackRox all over the place. I know that there was a technical briefing this morning about it. Is there anything you want to mention specifically about StackRox that you think set it apart, or it's called Red Hat Advanced Cluster Security now?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, yeah, one of the things I like about it, again, is that you can see that it's showing up in multiple boxes here. And so we're really looking forward to, so it does that deeper data collection. It does the auto suggest for network policies. It gives you a visualization of the network policy layer. OpenShift Service Mesh visualizes layer 7 with service mesh policies, but with StackRox, you get that network policy layer visualization as well. And I'm really looking forward to what we're going to be able to do with service mesh and StackRox together. We get behavioral analysis, but you can see, right, we show it, we tick a lot of these boxes. And so when we think about that, infinity arc that you see for DevOps or DevSecOps, we really feel like StackRox helps with that. And we're also really excited about the shift left elements, right? That we can do that early analysis, leverage that data for the admission control policies. And we're going to continue to work with all of the partners here, right? So Sneak does the dependency analysis. Again, as I mentioned, there are other partners who show up in a number of these boxes. And so it's not just about what we offer from Red Hat. We genuinely do believe in choice. So, look across what's available and see what suits you best. And some of our customers have relationships with some of these partners, and they're going to want to continue that. We also really expect, right, we're gonna get a lot of value from being able to tightly integrate the Red Hat ACS StackRox solution in with OpenShift, just because we're now part of the same company that we can do that.
Yeah, and I have to say that, like, when I heard the news that Red Hat was acquiring StackRox, it was a huge relief, because I've worked with, the various KubeCon talks, whatever, with a bunch of people for, that worked at StackRox, and they all seem to be great people. So it's not, where the technology is great and the people are great. So
absolutely,
it's a 1-2 punch win kind of thing for Red Hat, I feel like.
Yep.
Let's touch on, like, how can a developer kind of get buy-in, or some kind of leadership buy-in? That's always hard, and I want to touch on that before we jump into the next section here.
It's a great question. I think that you really want it's about the success of the business, right? And so the business cares about getting capabilities, getting new solutions, differentiating innovative solutions out to the market as quickly as possible, and ensuring customer satisfaction along the way, right? So when you think about meeting those goals, security has to be part of that. And the sooner that you can help the organization address their security concerns, the faster you can deliver, and the better you can address customer satisfaction, right? Customers don't want to have to update because a vulnerability that has been known for 4 years is present in something you just shipped. Right? They understand if it's a newly discovered vulnerability, that happens. Everybody understands that. But if the work wasn't done early to assess for vulnerabilities that have been around for a while, and that can happen. We've seen breaches that have been due to situations like that. There's a fix for the vulnerability, it wasn't applied. So it's all about value to the business, value to the end user and the customer. And if you can help your management understand, if you yourself, it helps if you believe it too, right? As a developer, you believe this is going to make your life easier. You're going to deliver more quickly if you have this ability. That helps a lot. This was a number of years ago now, but I did talk to a customer who, the gentleman, he was in the development team. He would have loved to do vulnerability analysis early in his pipeline, and his security team was holding on tight. They didn't want to give the app dev team access to their security tools. That was a really interesting one. And so it's like, so thinking in terms of not just technical, but a combination of technical and business value, right? Helping convince your management, and then get your management enlisted to help convince other players that this is the right thing for the business.
It's interesting you mentioned that case of like the security team wouldn't let them in, because that has actually happened to me, like working in the DevOps space, right? Like trying to secure systems and networks and everything. It's like, well, if you have the Nessus scanner and I have to come submit a ticket and it takes a couple of days for you to get back to me on any fixes I get in, can I just get access to the Nessus scanner? So, I mean, like we had licenses. There's no, technical reason to keep me away from them other than, like separation of responsibilities
duties, right?
or duties or something. But it's not like there's always that like aspect of, no, this is security's job, and no, it's everybody's job, right? So you have to crack open that culture of security tools are for security people, or you have to crack open your pipeline and tell them insert themselves into the pipeline in certain places.
And honestly, the kind of thing you're describing is partly why containers became so popular with developers.
Exactly.
It's like, how many weeks does it take me to get a VM configured so that I can do my work? And
one of our regulars is experience the same thing, and is going around them kind of deal.
And so what we see our customers doing to deal with that silo scenario, typically, sometimes it requires executive support. But the best thing, the most successful teams find a team that they can pilot these changes with. And so that they have an opportunity to iterate on the changes, work together. So ideally, you'd find somebody on that security team who's willing to work with you, or maybe you have to, bring somebody in to the app dev team who has security background, and they can work with you, and you do a pilot and you demonstrate the value through the pilot, and then you just advertise the heck out of it internally.
Right. It's funny, technically I work in, a marketing kind of function, but it's more like an ops advocate. If you think of like developer advocates, it's like an ops advocate kind of deal. And I can't express enough how important it is to like market what you've done better, right? Like I tell people all the time, there's a lot that DevOps can teach marketing, and there's a lot marketing can teach DevOps, because there's so many things. And I'm actually doing a talk on it with a couple other folks from the community, like how to market your thing, be it open source or, whatever it is you're doing, to other people in a better way, right? Like so that you can show people that your pilot is successful in an effective way, right? Like look at actual numbers and metrics and how this could change velocity or improve user experience, right? Like things that, leadership is going to care about. Absolutely. That's what you should be focused on, as far as making sure that, you've got that buy-in.
And then I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention, though, that use some security language, right? Security teams think about reducing risk, right? And so how can shifting security left reduce risk for the organization, right?
Yes.
We're balancing business value against risk all the time, every day. And nobody, no CEO, no CISO, no VP, nobody in your management chain wants their company splashed on the front page of a newspaper.
Right.
And
like that should be a bullet point. Like we're not going to be on the front page of the newspaper, like put that in your presentation. Seriously.
That's right.
That's what's going to get VP's attention, and Tony TV points out like language is a barrier sometimes.
True.
So you have to kind of adapt yourself to the language of the people you're talking to. And that's one of the biggest things I learned when I was on the Ansible team on the product marketing side was, adapting yourself to the persona you're talking to is very important.
Yeah, that's and we really kind of had to think about that, as we were kind of recrafting a bit of our language, around how we go to market with our security story, partly due to the StackRox acquisition, right? We wanted to do that, build, deploy, and run as a key message, but those words, they're great for a DevOps team, but the security team is thinking, how do I detect problems? How do I protect my environment? How do I respond to an incident? So absolutely, language is a key element, and risk management is another term, another way that team thinks.
Right. They think all about risk management. Absolutely. So there's a change occurring in the security landscape inside Kubernetes. And, this is kind of a hot button topic for me right now because we're trying to work on the blog post for this, and it's kind of a nightmare. So, like pod security policies are getting deprecated in Kubernetes 1.21.
Yep.
And they'll be fully, out of the system, out of Kubernetes completely. Pod securities will be gone. Pod security policies will be gone from Kubernetes in 1.25, which should be next year sometime, or hopefully mid next year. What do we do? There's just, there's all these, things that we have to worry about, right? Like, but there are solutions here to folks using pod security policies today. That can put in place now and work on moving PSPs over into them.
Yeah. And I want to start by being clear that the community, the Kubernetes community, is actively thinking about alternatives, right?
Yes.
Pod security policies are not going to go away until, even though we've got a timeline in front of us, they will go away, but with a replacement.
Right.
And so for anybody who's interested, there have been conversations happening. There's, I might have the link up to to some of the proposals. There are a couple of, if I can find it, I'll post it. There are a couple of proposals in place for ways to replace. There's something called Pod Security Plus Plus. And there's something called the bare minimum pod security policy. So
I would like the bare minimum pod security policy to be a default, to be honest with you.
and I think that's partly where the community is thinking, right? Is that, so pod security policies are great, and OpenShift uses, OpenShift uses security context constraints, which were kind of the predecessor to pod security policies.
Right.
Pod security policies never fully took off. And the truth is that both both SCCs and PSPs require a degree of understanding, and they have a level of complexity that can create frustration. So they create this great default protection, and you really kind of have to understand a lot about how, pod, the security context that a pod can request, and you maybe need to understand Linux capabilities, and there's prioritization of these, and so it's not simple. Great protection, and we leverage it. It is on by default in OpenShift. You can't turn it off.
Yeah.
So the community, kind of is leaning towards the concept, at least. And by the way, SIG auth or SIG security, if you want to participate in the conversation, hopefully you can share the links that I put. Awesome, to the two different proposals. Active discussion going on, and kind of the thinking is that around, we might land on something that says you have at minimum 3 policies available to you, kind of a red, yellow, green, right? Green means that it's the most secure. And maybe that's what's on by default, but you have the option to use a less secure that would be yellow, and a very permissive, which might be red, right? And we're also seeing kind of the rise of an increasing interest in OPA Gatekeeper as a way to write complex policies. And so kind of there's the conversation has been about, okay, a default built-in set of capabilities that are perhaps simpler and easier to use than the current pod security policies. Similar, but simpler. And then for complex use cases, OPA Gatekeeper or something comparable would be the way to go. And then there's a debate about, can those be used together? Would you use one instead of the other? Assuming we have these default policies, can we make it easy for those to be represented in something like OPA Gatekeeper in case you want to switch to a more complex environment, right? How do you do all of this in a way that doesn't break what you're already doing? Or there's going to be a migration, right? No question. But let's say once we've migrated and you're up and running, with, say, the new defaults, and now you need something more complex. How do you do that without losing the protection you've already got? And so there's all this thinking going on about, again, do we, make it easy to deliver the same thing in the default as also in Open Gatekeeper, or one of the other solutions like Kyverno is also out there looking at policy management. So the community's thinking really hard about this, right? They don't want to leave anybody behind, and they want to reduce complexity for the end user and the consumer while still offering the ability to secure the environment.
Yeah.
So please contribute, anybody who's interested.
Anybody who's interested. Let me drop the link to Kyverno in here too.
Yeah.
Come on, you can do it, mouse. I believe in you. Cool. So, the Linux kernel capabilities of namespaces and all the fun network ports and file systems and everything else, you have to manage that too, along with the platform. There's a question in here. Do you believe that distributions like Debian and RHEL have a monopoly on the best audits today? I wouldn't say it's a monopoly on the best audits. But there's definitely more of them for those two distros, right? Like RHEL-based ones and Debian-based ones, as opposed to some other ones.
And I'm not sure what's meant by audit in this case. Audit by whom, or audit capabilities in the product?
Right.
So, maybe we'll hear back from the questioner.
Fabio, what you're digging for exactly.
And in the meantime, I can riff a little bit. So certainly, I would expect that any of these. So first of all, one of the cool things about pod security policies and SCCs is it gives the cluster admin a way to manage access to Linux capabilities, host network, et cetera, without them having to be Linux admins. Right. They might need to learn about these things, but they never have to work at the OS layer to protect the host, because they can prevent access to the host network, the host file system with a PSP.
Right.
I think it's important that we maintain some of that basic set of capabilities in the replacement solution. We need to give Kube users a way to continue to do that. And again, maybe it's just not going to be as many different factors that can be tweaked in the replacement.
Right.
And then go ahead.
There's many levers in all of this, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the only thing I was going to say, but go ahead.
Right.
Please.
And then the runtime comes into play, right? Is the runtime, running unconfined, or is there a setcomp policy applied to the runtime that comes into play? That's something that is still separate, I believe, from the replacement. I'm going to make myself a note to ask in our next conversation, how they view seccomp, in fact, around all of this. And then in terms of the audit capabilities, right? So, and I know RHEL better than Debian. So it's a combination for me of ensuring that SE Linux is on. And I would assert that SE Linux has a broader range of capabilities than AppArmor, for example.
Right.
So the isolation and the protection provided by SE Linux is key. And again, that's not something that has to be managed at the kube layer.
No.
And then, how do you audit the host operating system? Again, OpenShift 4 works with RHEL Core OS, which is a container optimized OS, only has the packages needed to run OpenShift. Audit D is on by default. But
very important. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can do deeper auditing. And so some of those partners that we talked about earlier, including StackRox, Sysdig, Palo, Aqua, they deploy an additional capability that does deeper data collection. And some of the solutions do correlation, which is really critical for a container environment where things are coming and going, right? You can't just, that process that was running a few minutes ago might have died, as we were saying earlier, right? And you've collected data on that process. How do you associate that with the name of a deployed pod or a service so that what's relevant, and that correlation really matters. And I'm sorry, I can't say much about Debian. I don't know if that's something you can opine on.
I mean, Debian has a good set of auditing capabilities. It's, to me, the difference, coming from my, Linux admin and moving into Red Hat kind of area, right? Like I've always felt like SC Linux has always been there for me, if that makes sense, right? Like where AppArmor's a little newer. I remember reading about SC Linux, in like the year 2000. So it's been, developed rather heavily by a lot of people at this point. And I think, given that we're on a Red Hat channel, Rail's probably going to be the better choice for everybody, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I'm interested, I just did a quick Google, right? So there's Audit D also available with Debian.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we also start to hear coming up more often is conversations around eBPF,
Yes.
again, for that deeper data collection, right? Mm-hmm. So that's definitely a space Red Hat is StackRox is already there. Red Hat will be investing more in that space. And so, when it comes to Debian, I'm just going to Google again and see eBPF, is that already part of a Debian distro? Right. So, but eBPF is something definitely worth looking into.
Absolutely. And I'm trying to find, I know there's an eBPF book that someone sponsored at some point and it's free somewhere, but I can't find it. I'm sorry. But there are a lot of great, like Brendan Gregg. If you haven't been to his website, definitely recommend you check out Brendan Gregg's website because it is just full of knowledge on all things eBPF. And he's actually written a book about it. So
cool.
I'll drop that link in there too.
Yep. And there is a ebpf.io website as well.
Right. So. Yes. ebpf.io. Yeah. Grab that. Oh, actually, no, that's for sale now. Oh, I typed it wrong. That makes
okay.
all the difference in the world.
I was going to say, I'm looking at it.
It's like I know she wouldn't tell me. No, I typed that wrong. Anyways, so yeah, eBPF gives you like a deep look at the syscalls and everything going on underneath the hood kind of deal. And that is, if you want to do a lot of tooling or a lot of tweaking, that's a great place to do it. Yeah. So, we're kind of wrapping up here. We only got about 7 minutes left. What would you say in the security realm keeps you up at night, right? Like from your perspective, what is the thing that you worry about the most?
Boy, I think really I assume that there's going to be unknown, right? That there's something's going to come up that none of us predicted. And so it's not so much the unpredicted that keeps me up. It's more, the organizations that haven't yet found a way to update their processes to at least do the basic. That kind of is what really concerns me, right? They're maybe not yet structured in a way to make it easy to update vulnerable packages or even be aware that they've got vulnerabilities in their environment. They're not yet doing the appropriate level of security for identity and access management. There have been it's really, again, you kind of need that belt and suspenders approach, and there's always going to be something unexpected. So I really do worry most when people aren't even using a belt.
Right. Exactly. Right. It's why are you still using string to hold up your pants? There's this invention called a belt, right? And that, to be honest with you, it's not to pull a full Don Rumsfeld here, but like there actually is unknowns in the security space. They're called 0 days. Yep. So we have to be constantly vigilant of these things. And if you go back and look at the Struts 2 vulnerability and the whole story behind that, it was literally one person in an organization patching all their stuff as fast as they could because they found this vulnerability. And that whole story is just fascinating. But that was a 0 day, and a lot of people were using Struts. That version of Struts is still being used by a lot of people. And that's the scary thing to me, is that a lot of people aren't doing that dependency scanning that is so important. What do you, as far as misconceptions about DevSecOps, what do you think are some of the misconceptions people have about it?
First, they think that they can just add a tool and it will fix everything.
Yeah, that's
right. So even though I've talked a lot about vulnerability scanning and we've talked about dependency analysis, tools aren't enough, right? No. So you have to incent your team to you have to give them time to respond to what those tools tell them, right? And it's like they're in, I've been in organizations where developer productivity is measured by the number of lines of code they deliver.
Oh God, that's such a bad metric.
It's terrible.
Oh,
it's terrible.
Just introduce it. You're asking for vulnerabilities at that
That's
point.
Right. So don't measure your team on that, right? Mm-hmm. And don't measure them on the number of vulnerabilities that are found, the first time you scan.
Right.
Like measure them on how quickly they can respond. Mm-hmm. Do things like that. And or how many tests, the effectiveness of tests, right? Also, are you testing the right things? It's not about necessarily how quickly. Again, you have to balance the speed of delivery with meeting the customer goals, and the customer goals include reasonable expectation of security, right? So balance those two, and you got to think about how do you help, because people respond to how they're measured, right? So exactly. What's an effective measurement that will help your team do what you're looking for?
Right. So let's end the show on a high note. You work here at Red Hat. You're in the cloud platforms business unit, like I am. What gets you up in the morning? What motivates you to come in and work for Red Hat every day?
I just love the opportunities in front of us, and the fact that we work with so many terrific companies and customers across such a wide variety of industries, which creates the opportunity to help them tackle really interesting problems that make a difference in the world, whether it's healthcare or energy delivery or, telco. I mean, there's just this really fascinating set of problems as we help our customers move into a more cloud native world, and we get to be there working with them on the forefront and figuring it out and helping them on that journey. And it's a great deal of fun, and it's such a great group of people to work with too. So.
Oh, no, last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. Do you think there's a lack of qualified professionals in the DevSecOps arena?
Certainly it's hard to find qualified security folks,
right?
And they're expensive, so invest in growing them, right? Give people a chance to learn,
build your bench,
right? And if you've got somebody on your app dev team who's interested in security, help them get training, and they'll be able to understand both sides of the puzzle, right? So
exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Kirsten. This has been a wonderful episode and a lot of great conversation and chat and things that we've shared with everybody. So I really appreciate you coming on today. And
my pleasure.
Thank you, everybody in the audience, for watching and participating. And we will see you again here in, there's some stuff coming up. So it'll be a few more weeks for the next In the Clouds episode. But later on the channel today, we will be talking about Claire 4 and container scanning. Yeah, it's going to be an awesome episode. It's actually the series premiere of Cloud Native Thursdays here on OpenShift TV, and that'll be at 1 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC. So come check it out when you get a chance. So again, thank you to Kirsten. Thank you to the audience. Stay safe out there, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Take care all.